Welcome back to another episode of Eerie Excursions, the podcast that takes the road less travelled and a left turn into the shadows with me, Amy, a history nerd who loves a good ghost story. Now, I'm no expert, so along our Eerie adventure, we'll meet local guides who know all about the spooky legends lurking in their back garden. And watch out, because we might just be down the road from where you are right now. For today's trip, we're venturing the furthest north we've ever been on this podcast, to Scotland's capital city of Edinburgh.
I was painting downstairs. There's a set of doors that go to the venue next door when we walk in our entrance corridor, and they're black doors. So if I'm doing it, I'll repaint them black just to give them a new coat of paint. So I was doing that. I was painting, and I heard kids laughing. It wasn't a sound like, that sounds like kids laughing. It was, that's kids laughing. And now I was working overnight, so I knew it was late.
You ready to delve into the darkness? Sitting on a volcanic rock, Edinburgh is a city that blends history, culture, and nature. It may be a bustling metropolis, but it's not hard to feel like you're stepping back in time. It's also no surprise that we would take a trip to Old Eerie, a Scots phrase for old smoke and the nickname for Edinburgh, because there are many eerie legends lurking in the city. From Burke Hare to the poltergeist of Grey Friars cemetery, there's so much to cover. So let's meet our guide.
I'm Jaime, and I have been with City of the Dead tours since around about 2007. We are one of the oldest and one of the biggest, and of course the best, walking tour in Edinburgh. Started in 1999 by Jan Andrew Henderson. So the company's been here for 26 years. We started to document what Jan then called the Mackenzie poltergeist. We are the ones responsible for bringing it to the public, and Jan documented it all at the very, very start for his book that he was writing, and he ended up forming a tour company to carry on that research in a way. And it's went beyond the release of the book, and we're still doing it, many years later, and we're still getting, interactions with people on the tours.
Before we hear about those interactions, let's take a step back and hear about Edinburgh's history.
There's been settlements around Edinburgh Rock, an extinct volcano. You've got the Seven Hills which make up Edinburgh, going back to the Iron Age and things like that. So it's always been a fortification, where the castle is now in Castle Rock. So over the centuries, it's been it's an absolute perfect location for defence and basically power. So that's the natural geology of it. But that's the other side why in Edinburgh you're all up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, because of the Seven Hills and all the valleys in between which make up, basically Edinburgh, the old town especially. You got the castle to Holyrood, to the Royal Mile, and the two valleys that come off either side of that. Now you can walk across on the North Bridge or the South Bridge, but before, it was all up and down. It was quite a trek, yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's always been a great location, even when we were a walled-in city. Through the time, the 14, 15, 100, we had the walls defending us. Even then, though, it was still, it was quite rough, ragged, up and down, and not very flat anywhere, But it's always worked. And today, and we've maintained a lot of that history and a lot of the layout, which is good. It may be new buildings, but the layout is roughly, in line with the old.
Today's excursion focuses mostly on the city's vaults, and for those who don't know about Edinburgh's vaults, our trusty guide, Jaime, will tell us more.
So the vaults are basically chambers built within 18 massive arches that hold up South Bridge. Now, after Edinburgh came out of being a walled-in city, the early 1700s, after that, the new town started to be built. So we were expanding, the city was expanding. We were called the Athens of the North. People were coming from all over the world to go to the university. The university quad hadn't been built yet, but the plans were. Robert Adam had already designed it, and we knew where it was going in the south side. This is obviously before South Bridge. So at that time, the only way to get up to the south side would be through the Cowgate, which at that point had become a mess. It had become a slum. There was old buildings, and the city council kept saying they didn't have the funds to rejuvenate it. Yet the new town was being built with all these beautiful townhouses and all these, gas lighting and drainage, and it was amazing. And all the money and businesses had moved to the new town, so it had become a derelict slum in the Cowgate area. So the council had two options. They could either clear the Cowgate, make it all attractive to the people coming to the university, like the new town, redevelop it. But that was too expensive because we're Scottish. So we decided instead to build a massive bridge over the top of it to connect the south side with the Royal Mile. And that's when South Bridge was put through. We were talking about a bridge over the Cowgate from as early as 1720, but nothing happened. 1752, there was an Act of Parliament went through to allow a connecting bridge over the Cowgate to connect it. And then it wasn't until 1785 the foundation stone was laid. 1785 to 1788, the structure of the bridge with the 19 massive arches was built. And basically it was an extension of the high streets and these shops. The bridge itself is only 55 foot from pavement to pavement, so they needed to build basically shops on it. So what they did is they built up the sides, covering the arches, to put the shops on at bridge level. And that would provide the shops, which is great. So the arches were now covered, and they ran corridors down both sides of the arches. The only one that's open is the Cowgate arch. So the big archways, they were then floored up to 3 times, and then they were sectioned off, and these were allocated to businesses up on South Bridge and on the Cowgate below. This would cost them extra money to hire these storage and workshops, and that money would pay for the upkeep of the bridge. That was the plan. It was brilliant. But we didn't waterproof it because we're Scottish. It never rains in Edinburgh, so what's the point? It's a lot of money. So it's leaked from day one. So the businesses abandoned the vaults as early as 1792. They kept the shops, but they abandoned the vaults. They bricked up their entrances, saying, well, we don't have them, we're not paying for them. Which left them empty until about 1800. And then that's when Edinburgh's illegal trade starts moving. Illegal distilleries, illegal drinking dens, prostitution, gambling dens. Then after that, 1826, 1827, there was a lot of people then came from Ireland and the Highlands, forced out of their natural environments through no fault of their own. And they found themselves with nowhere to go. The Vagrant Act was in force, which meant you could not beg in the streets of Edinburgh. You would be homeless. You'd be put to hard labour if you were found, which was horrendous. So then they started living in the chambers beneath South Bridge in these conditions, which was horrendous. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid wiped through them, and yeah, they didn't last long enough. And then in 1860s, the City Improvement Act had the rubble that was taken from the old buildings that they knocked down. They then landfilled the vaults about 1863. So nobody could use them ever again. Until ex-international rugby player Norrie Rowan went digging in 1985 and started bringing them all back to the public.
Part of the South Bridge vaults Jaime and his team do their tours is called Damnation Alley, according to their website. Now, we actually won't be walking down the vaults today. Instead, we're nice and cozy in the gatehouse of Grey Friars Cemetery, the cemetery with all the names from Harry Potter, for that reference. And I think this was a good idea because Jaime tells me all about the ghostly activity that takes place down there in Damnation Alley.
People have been seeing on the tours, and guides have experienced. Recently there's been a lot of different guides mentioning that they could hear a child's musical box. So we've had our vaults a long time, 14 years or so. I know every sound in these vaults. I spent a lot of time in the vaults on my own over the years. I used to go in overnight to do maintenance, like painting staircases. There's the only time to do it is overnight. There's no customers, no tours. So I'd go in about 10 p.m. and come out at like 9 in the morning. And I do that 3 times a year. Just me and silence. So it's really, really nice. But so over time you get to learn every sound. I knew every sound in that place. I've never heard a kid's musical box. However, this has also been reported by people on the tour as well. So there was once I was maintenance, one of the last times I was actually doing it. I was painting downstairs. There's a set of doors that go to the venue next door when we walk in our entrance corridor, and they're black doors. So if I'm doing, I'll repaint them black just to give them a new coat of paint. So I was doing that. I was painting, and I heard kids laughing. It wasn't a sound like, that sounds like kids laughing. It was, that's kids laughing. And now I was working overnight, so I knew it was late. What the hell? I knew the venue was not open next door. It was locked. It was closed. Everybody was out. There was just me. And I knew it was late. So I looked at my watch. It was 3:05 in the morning. I'm like, that's weird. So the flats at the front of the property, in front of the vaults, basically on the street, because we have to go, through, not through the flats, but underneath the flats, because that's the layout of the vaults. You need to go through private property to get into the vaults. So the flats all around outside, they're all Airbnbs. So I just thought, all right, fine, it's just a late check-in. The flight's been delayed. It's just a family arriving to one of the Airbnbs. So I thought, well, you know what, I could do a cigarette anyway. So I went outside. There's not a person around. No lights on. No, it was deadly silent. So that was one of the times that I did feel kind of uneasy, and I don't feel uneasy at all in the vaults because I'm so used to them. But yeah, that was one of my only personal
Just on that, because you said you felt uneasy. Was there any reason why you felt uneasy? Was it the way?
No, it was just creepy. It was just, no, I wasn't laughing because I mean, to be fair, I hate kids. So that's why I picked up on it as well. And it was loud enough for me to distinctly say it was definitely kids laughing. I'd say maybe four or five children, different, laughs. If they're in a group, you can hear them, So it was definitely kids, and it was clear. It wasn't like a muffled. It was clear, and that's why I thought they were so close. But even then, outside, if they were, there's a good 60 yards to the main door from where I was to the street outside, and that's over 70 feet worth of concrete. So. That was the only time. Not uneasy. I didn't get creeped, but I thought, yeah, that's plenty for tonight. And I didn't think that I was hearing things, because it was just once. So, but yeah. And then recently we've heard the customers saying that they've heard a child's musical box. But there is a report of a little boy that walks around, a ghost, who's been picked out by different mediums and people on the tour and guides as well, called Jack, who just walks about in one of the vaults. And he brushes past people. It's like if you've got a dog or someone brushing past you, you can feel it, brush past the back of you or something. And he tries to take, it's only women, he tries to take women's hands. It's never guys, it's always women who feel a coldness just on the first sort of 3 fingers of their hand if their hands are down at their side. So obviously a lot of people can jump, at that. Within the chambers, obviously it was dark and it's really quite low talk, and suddenly somebody screams in the group, But yeah, he is known for that. But yeah, seeing like a little boy, he means no harm. He's just, he's just a little boy. He just wanders about, possibly looking for his mum. So, but yeah, that's why he goes for women.
Do we know who Jack might have been in real life? No.
There was very. I mean, you got to remember, people back then were illiterate as well. People didn't read and write. It wasn't like now. No records were kept. Again, these people came from Ireland and the Highlands. They weren't documented. They were forced to move to look for work to survive, and they arrived with just the clothes they had. So. Yeah, it would be impossible. There is no written records on individuals.
That makes complete sense.
Which is a shame, because it would be good fun to try and It's different with the graveyard because we've got records, and find out who people are and things like that. So, but yeah, with the vaults, they were the sort of lowest of the low at the time, and nobody cared. Yeah,
and it's just incredible to think that it's all of this is going on. You've got the criminal activity, you've got prostitution, and you've got. So I guess you got families living down there as well. Yeah,
not necessarily at the same time. I mean, there was never enough people in Edinburgh breaking the law at any one time to do it. But I mean, it was vast. It's a huge labyrinth of underground tunnels and chambers. At that point when it was still all connected up to each other. Yeah, there was loads of space. There was loads of space for everybody. They didn't have to be, all on top of each other. Definitely not.
As Jaime said, people living in the vaults would have been subjected to some of the worst conditions. Disease was rife, and with the diseases back then, death often followed closely behind. Dead bodies in the vaults would not have been an uncommon sight, or more like smell and feel, as the vaults would have been so dark it'd be hard to actually see the bodies. But anyway, dead bodies in the 1800s were in hot demand. So this is the part where we turn to 2 of Edinburgh's most famous criminals. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to talk about Mr. Burke and Mr. Hare.
grave robbers, as much as people like to think that they were there stealing jewellery and things like that, no, they weren't. They got really nothing for jewellery. A shilling. Grave robbers were not there to steal rings and things like that. They were there to steal the bodies. They would dig the bodies up because they could sell them to local medical schools. It was big business, it was big money. It went back to about 1720 when we started sending more and more people to medical school. We were leading the world in medicine because the anatomists and the surgeons had a constant supply of cadavers. We didn't have plastic lifelike dolls back then. We didn't have refrigeration. We were going through a lot of bodies. A lot of bodies. Each doctor to qualify before they graduated from Edinburgh University over their training career needed to work on 3 separate bodies. Okay, we were putting out about 200 bodies a year, doctors a year from Edinburgh Medical School. Legally, we would only get in maybe 3, 4, 5 bodies a month. When in practice, we were going through 80, 90 bodies a month because that was the demand. And with demand, you need to have supply. Any standard business, and this was a big business. We had bodies coming up from London, the Ben Crouch gang in London. We had them sent up here. We had them from Liverpool, had them from local graveyards. It was the most great source of bodies. So, they knew it was going on. It wasn't until 1830s though, when, just after the two we mentioned, really kicked it off. So, William Burke and William Hare, 2 Irishmen, they get labelled grave robbers, body snatchers. My problem with that is, yes, they were body snatchers in a sense because they snatched the body from life. They were not grave robbers. Not once did they dig a body out the ground. They never even attempted to dig a body out the ground. They murdered the victims and then sold their bodies. They were Scotland's first recorded serial killers. That's their proper title, and that's what they should be remembered for, not as grave robbers, because they weren't. Far too much work for them. So how it started. William Burke, William Hare, they were from Ireland. They came across, they met up again. They knew each other previous, but they met up again when they were help making the Union Canal between Glasgow and Edinburgh. Then after that, after a few years, William Hare had a lodging house in the Westport where he would rent rooms out and stuff with his common-law wife. So this got the talking. Now, they had an old soldier called Donald living in the lodging house, and he passed away natural causes. But he had owed William Hare 4 shillings in rent. And when you owe an Irishman 4 shillings in rent, that Irishman wants his money. Dead or alive, he wants his money. So he looked at his possessions. There was nothing worth anything there, not even a shilling, if that. So he tries to find Donald's family. This is, you've got to remember, this is a day after Donald dies, so things are getting a bit, And then he hears about this medical school, Dr. Knox, this gentleman, this doctor who, if you couldn't afford a funeral for your loved one, and obviously if everything was legit, you could donate their body to a medical school, as you could yourself in life if you wanted to. And they would give you a token appreciation, and they would take care of the funerals and things like that for you. Of course. So he thought, well, I've done nothing wrong. Even if I get 4 shillings for him, that's my 4 shillings, I'm happy. So he enlisted the help of his good friend, William Burke, and they went down to Dr. Knox's surgery, and the assistant came out, they took him in, and they were given an envelope. And I think that is the pivotal moment. If in that envelope there'd been maybe even 5 shillings, maybe 10 shillings, we would never have heard of William Burke and William Hare, because it would just be done in that set. They would carry on, they'd be going back to their normal life of just drinking and just being rowdy. But there was 10 Scots pounds, and that was about 1.5 years hard labour wages. They'd never seen this kind of money before. They were millionaires instantly in their own minds. So that was it. They thought, this is easy. We just bring a bod. That was it. They went on their killing spree. 16 people that William Burke admitted to anyway. And I'm surprised they got away with it for so long, because the more money they got, the more drunk they got. The more junk they got, the more careless they got. They always went for people who wouldn't be recognised or, noticed. Vagabonds, drifters. Nobody would be looking for them. But they made a mistake. There was a local guy called Daft Jaime. He was obviously learning difficulties. He's obviously what we now class as definitely autistic. He was harmless. He just wandered the streets. He had a thing for funerals. If he saw a funeral procession, he would follow the funeral procession. He once followed a funeral procession to Queensferry, back then on the ferry across the Forth, and just because he just walked behind the funeral procession. So he was a special boy, but he was well known. But he was like, that was what he was known as Daft Jaime. But he was well seen around the town. And unfortunately, William Burke and William Hare decided that they would try and off or de-alive his grandmother. He was brought up by his grandmother because his mother had abandoned him, because he also had deformities as well, like clubbed feet he had. But his grandmother had brought him up, and this is all he knew was his grandmother. So they decided what William Burke and William Hare would do to their victims is they would get them so drunk that they would basically collapse. And what they would do is one would jump on your chest, another one would put two fingers, your index and the forefinger, over your nose and a thumb under the chin, and they'd clamp you shut. So you'd suffocate. You were so drunk you couldn't fight back. Your air was getting pushed out of your lungs. Suffocation, but there's no marks, there's no strangulation. Even back then, if somebody walked in with, if so they brought a body with, bruises, that's a little bit harder to ignore. There was... They would take bodies out the ground, but there was morals. There was a moral there somewhere. No, we can't. No, there's too much bruising around the face. No, there's stab wounds. What are you talking about? Natural. We can't get away with that. But no, that's 5 days old. Don't worry. So they decided to go for the grandmother, and Jaime actually came home because they tried to do it in her lodging house, and he went crazy, and he almost killed William Burke. By throwing him across a room and at a wall. The strength that he had was insane. Unfortunately, though, they had to both get the better of him, and they ended up killing Jaime. So this is where it does prove that the doctors did know, because before they took them both out of the morgue. Before Dr. Knox took Jaime out to be dissected, they cut his head off and they cut his feet off, so there'd be less chance of recognition. So that shows you how deep that we're into it. So they were caught by a prostitute. I believe it was the body of a prostitute, when one of the medical training doctors had claimed that he had seen the lady, and last night he was with her, and when he left she was absolutely fine. So then they managed to trace it back, and she was spotted, and then she was obviously seen as well. The body was also seen in William Hare's lodging house, and that's when they were caught. But William Hare turned King's evidence and grassed on William Burke. In fact, we've got the two faces over there in that case. That's the death and life mask. But the vaults, yeah. In our section of vaults, we go right to what is now Infirmary Street. That's where our vaults stop, that's where our exit is. We've got the old courtyard for the old city mortuary in our vaults. It was kind of like a Mary King's Close thing, where they built the bridge over existing buildings and just used it to sit on top. So we've got the courtyard. The old mortuary is still intact through one of our walls that's now owned by a different company. It's underneath the Royal Oak Bar on Infirmary Street. They tell you about the city mortuary on a plaque outside, and it is just right. So yes, during the late 1820s, before William Burke and William Hare were caught, this was big business. People knew there was things being done, to stop people taking bodies. Mort safes were made, the cages that go over the grave. You've got all the caged lairs in Grey Friars with the metal bars, you've got the enclosures, you've got mausoleums, you've got this place, which was the watch house, where families would sit and watch out over the graveyard because they couldn't afford a mort safe or something, or a watchman. Watchmen weren't trusted. People make huge things about, for some reason, Grey Friars Bobby's master used to be a watchman, which I have no idea where that came from. The original story, John Gray was a shepherd, but suddenly he was a night's watchman now. It worked. It's like, no, not that late. Night's watchmen weren't trusted in the 1830s, let alone the 1860s. They weren't used by that point. And to be fair, grave robbing and that by the 1860s had gone. It wasn't a thing anymore, because the Anatomy Act of 1832 made it a lot easier to get bodies to medical school. So that changed it. It still went on, but not into the 1860s. So this whole he was a night's watchman is utter garbage. Night's watchmen were not trusted purely because they were looking after the grave of someone in the winter who they didn't know. They were getting paid not a lot of money because the families couldn't afford a mort safe. So the grave robbers would come along and go, right, how much are you getting paid? Right, we'll triple it. go for your break 9 o'clock, or turn your back, or go for a pee. You know, what does he care? He's getting 4 times what he was getting before. Just for somebody who doesn't know. No, they weren't trusted at all. It was not a big thing in Edinburgh. Night's watchmen, and people like to make a thing there was. No, they weren't. They were not trusted because they were drunk and they just were not honourable at all. So this is why this place was built: watch houses, watchtowers. So it was a big thing, a huge big thing. But families would also pay a lot of money if you had vigilantes that would catch. Now, if you're 2 guys walking about with a tea chest at night going towards Surgeon Square, you'd have vigilantes waiting for people down there, just ready to pounce. You know, they'd be like, open the chest. No, open the chest. There's 15 of them. There's 2 of them. That chest's getting opened. And if there's a body in it, they'll probably get beaten to death. But then they'll get money from the families of the body that is because they've saved them from being taken to the medical school. So it was kind of worth it.
Yeah.
You know, there was loads of vigilantes because, you know, people were sick of people being dug up from the ground. So the vaults would have been perfect. It's nobody bat an eyelid. You can actually drag the body itself without being in a tea chest into the old city morgue. It went right into it.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect.
So yeah,
Right there, yeah.
although there's no written evidence, but again, they didn't really write things about it, you know.
Exactly, yeah.
This is why the doctors got away with it, because it was all the assistants that dealt with it. So the doctors could honestly say under oath, I didn't know where they were coming from. Of course they did, but they didn't. Because they basically gave the money to the assistants to hand over and the assistants would take the body. So the doctors literally had nothing to do with it. It was clever, but that's how Dr. Knox got away with it.
During our time in Edinburgh, we'll come up from the vaults, but staying in the realm of dead bodies, as Jaime tells me about where we've been sitting, in Grey Friars Cemetery. And it turns out it's not as cosy as I thought.
So at the moment we are in Grey Friars Kirkyard, one of the most obviously famous graveyards in Scotland, if not, you know, further afield. It's one of the oldest. Edinburgh is the oldest in Edinburgh, since St Giles is no longer there. Yeah, we've got a lot of years of history under our feet. The office is the old gatehouse for the graveyard. This was built 1834. Like I said, for the families to sit in, to watch over the loved ones. Anyways. So, but Grey Friars itself, yeah, I mean, we go way back to it gets its name from 1400s when there was a monastery. The monastery was founded down at the north, which is towards the Grass Market. The monastery was the Grey Friars. You've got Grey Friars that were Franciscan monks, and you know your Black Friars were Dominican monks. You've also got White Friars, but I can never remember where they're from. But the Grey Friars, they were self-sufficient. This was their grounds of the monastery. They grew their orchards, they grew their own herbs, they were quite self-sufficient, but they did a lot for the community and things like that. They were very peaceful. Unfortunately, we weren't peaceful during the Reformations and stuff, so we decided to smash up the monasteries, and then they'd rebuild them and we smash them up again, and then they'd rebuild them and then we smash them up again. So eventually, you know, it just got by coming out the 1400s and the early 1500s, the monastery down here had been abandoned. It was in ruins, it had fallen down, so pressure was on. The only graveyard that the centre of Edinburgh had at that point was indeed down at St Giles, behind St Giles Cathedral in the Royal Mile, and it was overflowing. The stench was horrendous. The bodies were coming out the back towards the Cowgate. They needed something fast. So 1532 it was Mary, Queen of Scots, who then gifted the lands of the Grey Friars Monastery to the people of Edinburgh to become a burial ground. It then became Grey Friars Burial Ground. Still not the church. The church came in the 1600s. Again, people will tell you that Mary, Queen of Scots gave the church and founded the church. No, she didn't. She would have to be Saint Mary, Queen of Scots then, because she'd have to have come back from the dead to donate that to the people of Edinburgh, and that would be a miracle. So, no, she had nothing to do with the church. It was the grounds that she gave, because she was still alive. So it became that, and then we started burying people. The bodies that were taken from St Giles, probably including John Knox, were then brought to Grey Friars and interred down the bottom at the North Gate. And then it became the only burial ground for 300 years. The only burial ground. Yeah. We have, going by the interment records and stuff, we're looking at between 500,000 and 750,000 bodies.
Wow.
Easily.
How? I don't understand.
There's just nowhere else for them to go. This used to be a vast sweeping valley. There's an old etching from the 1500s, before it was used, or just as it was used. It's a sweeping valley right down flush to the grass market, and now we have 22 feet of stairs, and that whole corner, that shows you how deep. The reinforcing walls down here as well. It is a human lasagna to the greatest extent. The history in this place, it's not like any other graveyard. One, because it's so full, but two, because within the grounds there's an area called the Covenanters Prison, which is all that remains of the world's first concentration camp. It was an unused yard, part of the graveyard that hadn't been used at that point in 1679, after the end of the Covenant movement in Scotland. Nothing to do with independence. It was basically, we didn't want the Anglicisation of the Scottish Church. Henry had done it years before. That's up to him. What he wanted to do in England is entirely up to him. But our king, doesn't matter if he's ruling in England too, you don't change our religion, all right? Because there's us, there's God. There's not us, king, God, or us, God, king. You're not the head of the church. Get over yourself, Charles. So, that was pretty much it. But at that point then, obviously being a Stuart king, it was a case of, right, well, you're with me or against me. And if you're against me, it's high treason. And you'll all be hunted down and you will be made an example of because you're against the king. It's like, we're not against the king. So this went on for 50 years. 50 years of killing for absolutely nothing. Scottish Presbytery basically didn't want Anglicisation in the Scottish Church. It came to a head in 1679 with the Battle of Bothwell Brig, when 1,200 Covenanters that were not executed on site, but they were brought to Edinburgh for an example. And they were brought, there was nowhere big enough, so they had to use what was going to be the South Burial Yard for Grey Friars Kirkyard. It was an open field. And this is where the story goes a bit weird. First up, the Mackenzie poltergeist was not named after Sir George Mackenzie, okay? This is public speculation. George Mackenzie, who was Lord Advocate of Scotland at the time, he's made out to be this torturer, murderous, lecherous, bloody Mackenzie. No, this is from people who have never researched the man in their life. They're reading websites and they're taking all this bullshit, and it's untrue. George Mackenzie was indeed Lord Advocate. Yes, he sent thousands of Covenanters to their death because he had to. He was a judge. These people had already been found guilty by lawyers and everything like that in a court of law. He didn't find them guilty. He just passed sentence. So yes, he had to, because if he'd shown any leniency to these people, he'd be made an example of by the king. He'd be worse than hung, drawn, and quartered because he was Lord Advocate and he's against the king. Sir George Mackenzie was a presbytery. He was a Scottish presbytery. He was a Covenanter. He was also the man who abolished witch trials in Scotland because he was against the use of torture in confession. People forget that part of it when he's called murderer. George Mackenzie had absolutely nothing to do with the Covenanters who were kept in Grey Friars. The only thing he did was he signed the legal documents to allow them to be kept in there for 4 months. He never visited them. He certainly didn't come and start torturing them. He didn't cut their heads off and didn't cut the children's heads off and spike them on the gate. That is untrue and utter garbage. He was in London. He wasn't even in Scotland at the time. Only he could override the church because the church said, no, you're not keeping the prisoners on our land. The only person that could override the church on land matters was Lord Advocate of Scotland, or the king. So he signed the paperwork, that was it. He had nothing to do with the prisoners himself. So this whole, he's made out to be this monster. He was a highly intelligent man. And the fact he wanted to be buried in Grey Friars after it, because at that point the church wasn't that size. You could see over Edinburgh, the city. Again, people will tell you that he's buried there to wind the souls up of the Covenanters. No, he was a Covenanter. He was a presbytery. He wanted to be buried in a presbytery graveyard but again, he couldn't let it. When he retired in 1684, he spent the last years of his life with his own money, his own time, going round holding cells and getting Covenanters out of them because it was illegal to be holding them. And he'd done that off his own back. So that tells you the man that he was, not this monster that he's made out to be. But the good side of him, unfortunately, doesn't create a good story. He wasn't called Bloody Mackenzie till the 1700s by the Romanticism novels and things like that. They needed a baddie. But if you actually read his biography and stuff, there's in his case records and stuff, he's a highly intelligent man, and he gets such a bad rep now. So no, it's not George Mackenzie running about after death, scratching people up. I can assure you. But there is something in there that's not human in that prison area.
And for the people who haven't necessarily heard of the poltergeist,
yes,
that's up in Grey Friars, what's in the activity?
Since 1999, It was open to the public. That area is now locked. We have the only access to it because we've been documenting it from day one. But from 1999, there's been people coming away with scratches, bruises, bite marks, feeling uneasy, getting knocked out cold, being grabbed, punched, kicked, pushed, thrown against walls, pushed to the ground, grabbed around the throat, fingerprints being left, burns being left on their skin. Over 3,000 over the years eyewitness accounts from people on the tours. These are just people on the tours. It's the most documented paranormal case in the world now. Unfortunately, because of things like online, it has kind of, again, grown many arms and legs now. It's lost it from the, people keep adding them on, and for something they read online, it's then true, which is a daily battle for me. A lot of people will have you believe that the Black Mausoleum is the Mackenzie Mausoleum. The Mackenzie Mausoleum is the big domed one. That's his burial chamber, along with another 11 Mackenzies, not just him. The Black Mausoleum is in the prison area on the left-hand side. It is a mausoleum halfway down, and that is the epicenter of what we call the Mackenzie poltergeist.
As always, you can visit the places we've talked about today. The cemetery you can visit on your own, but to view the vaults you will need to book on with the City of Dead tours. Link to the website is below. And if you do find yourself down in those vaults that saw criminals, families, and plenty of death, listen out for the sound of children echoing through time. That's it for now. You can also follow us on Instagram at Eerie Excursions, and to ensure you don't miss out on an excursion, subscribe to the YouTube channel below. For our next adventure, we'll be doing things a little bit differently. We'll be covering a full county, the county of Derbyshire.
There is actually more references to Robin Hood in Derbyshire than there are in Nottinghamshire. And this was just one of them. So that set me to thinking. I thought, why have we got this, as it appears, natural, monumental almost, totally natural structure called Robin Hood's Stride? And so I started to look into it.
See you next time for another venture into the darkness.